I want to first of all thank you all for coming out here today. We're standing up here on top of our downtown central library because you can really get a good sense for the city behind us here. We've got neighborhoods such as Golden Hill and Barrio Logan, City Heights, Sherman Heights, and you really get a good sense for how big our city is and how much need there is around the city as well. As we all know, these neighborhoods behind us, as well as the entire city, have been neglected for decades, allowed to deteriorate due to a lack of investment in a core responsibility of city government, infrastructure. That is now changing. No longer is infrastructure an issue that is being ignored by City Hall. We are now investing more in infrastructure than any time in recent history. We have approved streamlining measures which are reducing time and costs associated with infrastructure projects. We are getting more input directly from communities about what they want to see done in their neighborhoods. As we continue to make good on our promise to rebuild San Diego, I am devoted to making sure the focus on infrastructure does not lose momentum. While we have made great progress over the past few years, we are still facing an infrastructure crisis. Earlier this year, we released the city's first ever multi-year capital plan, which showed us just how far behind we are in our infrastructure investment. At that time, I said I would spend 2015 working on a financing plan for voter approval that would secure funding for our neighborhood infrastructure in a way that is fiscally responsible and would meet the needs of our communities. So today, I'm here to announce my proposal to rebuild San Diego. The Rebuild San Diego ballot measure will be a charter amendment which will go to voters in June of 2016. When approved, this measure will dedicate billions of dollars to neighborhood infrastructure without a tax increase. The funding will come from three sources. First, we will dedicate to infrastructure a portion of future natural sales tax growth above a baseline year, likely 2016. This will secure an estimated $3 to $4 billion over 30 years for infrastructure. Second, we will capture savings from the reduction in the city's pension payment, sometimes called the ADC or the ARC payment, that occurs around 2026 and even more considerably in 2029, dedicating this new money out of the general fund to infrastructure projects. This action will generate up to $1 to $2 billion in funding over 30 years. Third, the Rebuild San Diego measure formalizes our current commitment to dedicating half of all new general fund major revenue growth over the next 10 years specifically to infrastructure, a provision that I called for in my first infrastructure committee work plan 3 years ago. Mayor Faulkner has adopted this provision in his last two budgets, as well as in his 5-year financial outlook released last week, demonstrating his commitment to infrastructure investment. Combined, the three components of this plan will secure up to $4 to $5 billion over the next 30 years for capital and maintenance costs associated with neighborhood infrastructure projects. This will enable us to repave more roads, repair long-damaged sidewalks, rebuild police and fire stations, and replace aging storm drains. This measure is strict enough to ensure a sustained long-term investment in infrastructure, while at the same time being flexible enough not to overburden other city services and practical enough to be utilized by future policies in an effective and meaningful way. As the bulk of the pension savings component of this measure will primarily be realized more than 10 years from now, in the interim period, we will extend our deferred capital lease revenue bonding program while interest rates are still low. Furthermore, we are committed to accelerating the investment of that bond money in infrastructure projects as much as possible. If approved by voters, the Rebuild San Diego measure will mean that San Diegans will never again have to worry about future politicians allowing our city to deteriorate by shortchanging infrastructure improvements and maintenance. And now I'd like to introduce my colleague and a great partner in helping move our city forward, Council President Sherry Leitner.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning. I'm Council President Sherry Leitner. I'm happy to be here again today to talk about the importance of our city's infrastructure. As most of you are aware, the city has a 5-year plan to inventory all of the city's assets and complete a condition assessment on those assets. This process is underway. The 5-year plan promotes transparency by informing the public of future infrastructure needs and projecting cost estimates. Providing adequate public infrastructure involves a continuous review of the city's capital needs. It also provides comparisons to projected funding sources, which helps identify funding gaps. Our current reports estimate that over $3 billion in repair and upgrades are needed over the next 5 years, but much of the funding that is needed to make these improvements is not currently identified. Obviously, the city's capital funding needs far exceed the existing available resources. I agreed with Councilmember Kersey when he said, this is a critical milestone in our efforts to rebuild San Diego. Thankfully, as you heard, he has been hard at work developing a plan to help fund more infrastructure improvements. Creative solutions, such as this one discussed today, must be identified to finance the city's ongoing and new capital projects. We need to consider any and all options. It's a little bit akin to the water policy, every tool in the toolbox. So I appreciate the efforts that have been made by Councilmember Kersey. As the chair of the Infrastructure Committee, he has worked tirelessly to promote this effort and to find solutions to our infrastructure needs. It is imperative that as a city, we identify and allocate funding sources within our means before we look for outside sources or ask voters to consider approving additional tax increases. I look forward to continuing to work with Councilmember Kersey on his proposal and moving forward with continuing to improve our infrastructure. Thanks again to you. Thanks again, Mark, for your leadership on this very critical issue for the city.
Well, thank you, Sherry. Appreciate those comments. Infrastructure is a core responsibility of city government. The Rebuild San Diego measure ensures that we will have a long-term dedicated source of funding to repair and protect San Diego's neighborhoods, now and for future generations. I am committed to rebuilding San Diego, giving residents the city that they want and deserve.